Hi guys, welcome back to my channel on learning Python. So I made some quick revision to how you guys are seeing this. So first I made sure that the relevant panels here are a bit enlarged. So here you can see that the code, I hope, is a bit easier for you to use. And I also checked to make sure that the audio quality doesn't get staggered, because I noticed in the first video that there were some static ends on my end. So I hope this makes it easier for you guys to watch. Alright, so let's get started. As a summary of what we covered in the first presentation, we again covered something called data types. And again, if you guys remember, we had three kinds. We had integers, strings, and floats. So one problem is trying to make the number 42 into these three, converting 42 into all these different types of data types. And we can check whether we achieve that by doing type and the relevant characters or numbers we're testing. So type 42, we can predict that that's going to be an integer. So let's try running that, and in fact it is an integer. So now let's try to convert this into a float. So we would do that by doing type and then putting in 42.0, because like I mentioned previously, floats are just integers, but that floats just have decimal points at the end. So let's see what the type is, and we see down here that it is indeed a float. Now let's try to convert 42 into a string. So I talked about how we can use double or single quotation marks to convert any, or I guess numbers in this case, into strings. So let's do single quotation 42 and see that it does in fact create or convert 42 into a string. Perfect. Alright, and what we're going to cover for the second presentation is, let's see, tutorial. We're going to cover if-else statements, while loop, and for loop. Alright, so let's start with an if-else statement. So we see if-else statements really anywhere, especially in everyday language as well. So we can see that if, let's see, if it is nice, if it's, or I guess we could say if it's sunny outside, we should go outside and play tennis. We can also say if it is raining out, we can stay in and read. And we can say like else, meaning that it doesn't fit either of these two criteria. Then we can say, let's say that, I guess we can hypothesize that it might be snowing. We can say we will make hot cocoa and sit by the fire. So this is kind of an example of what if-else statements is like in the English language, but there's also something like this in programming as well. So let's do an example. So let's see, pretend that we want to see, let's see, trying to check names, for example. So let's say that the name is Bob. So if name is Bob, real quick, so we actually don't use verbs like in programming. We use something like to equal sign to specify. It's a checking mechanism. So if name equals Bob, this is asking, basically saying, does the name equal Bob? And if the name does equal Bob, we want it to print out, hello there, Bob. So let's try running that real quick. And down here in the console, you can see that it did in fact print out hello there, Bob. But pretend that the program didn't get the name right, and we set that if name was Alice, to print out hello there, Alice. But as you can see, the name is Bob, it's not Alice. So when we run this command right here, we can see that nothing happened. In the previous command, we saw that there was a printing out of hello there, Bob, but because the name was now changed to Alice, this command was false, so nothing printed. So to make sure that there's other options available, not just if checking for name is Alice, we can do list, or it would be else if, but programmers love to truncate command so that they spend less time on it. So this is condensed into something called elif. So if else if name is Bob, then print hello there Bob. Alright, let's try running this again. And down here you can see that it did in fact print out hello there Bob this time. So pretend that the name wasn't Alice or Bob. Let's say that the name was Tom. So it wouldn't fit either of these conditions, but then we can create a catch-all for this, meaning that if it doesn't fit either of these two criterias, we want it to print out something else. So it can be even something like hello there, and then hello there stranger. And if we run that, because the name is Tom and it doesn't fit any of these two criteria, you can predict what it's gonna print out. So if we run that, we can see that it just printed out hello there stranger. Alright, cool. So that is what if-else statement is. Pretty simple, I think, because we use it so often in everyday language. And now let's try to use a while loop now. So a while loop. So while loop is basically having a program run something over and over again until the condition meets. So I guess we could keep on going with the name example. This time let's have the user input the name this time. So let's do name input. What is your name? So when it's asking this, again, just to reiterate what input and then this sentence does right here, it asks for the user what the name variable is going to be containing. So basically, if I say my name is Bob, and then I type in name, inside that name is the value Bob, or the string Bob. Alright, cool. So let's try to use a while loop. Actually, before jumping right into the name, which might be a little hard to use while loop, let's actually do a simpler example called using numbers. So let's say that this variable spam had 0 as a value. So while spam, so this is saying basically how many spam cans I ate today. So while spam is less than 5, I want it to print, as long as the spam is less than 5, I want it to print out, you can eat one more spam can, because my limitation is 5, not more, or less than 5. Okay, so, alright, so we can try running this, but then the problem with running while loops is that spam will continuously be 0. So if we run this right here, then it's going to keep on looping and looping, and it's going to keep on printing out, you can eat one more spam, and by then I'll just be really unhealthy, full of spam and saturated fat. So we have to make sure that we have to put a stop to this, and we can do that by making sure that the spam equals or is greater than 5. And we can do that by making sure at the end that we add 1 to the spam. So this is basically saying keep on running, or I guess keep on running this loop, meaning print out you can eat one more spam can over and over, but make sure that spam increases by 1 so that the spam will eventually equal 5 or be greater than 5. So let's see what happens if I print this out, or if I run this right here. Oh, I forgot to run the spam portion as well. Oh, this is an important key actually. So in while loops, you have to make sure you initialize all the variables you'll be using beforehand. So initialize spam as 0. If you don't, you're going to get an error message like this on the bottom that says name spam is not defined. This isn't necessarily something that you get, an error that you get in for loops, which I'll cover later. Alright, so let's try running this while loop. And you can see that it did print out exactly how many times we'd want. So when spam was 0, it printed out you can eat one more spam can, and then when the spam was 1, you can eat one more spam can, and it does that over and over until spam equals or is greater than 5. Alright, so now let's go back to the while loop and using the naming example to continue that. So let's do while true. have that get the name from the user. What is your name? And if the name is Bob, we want this to break. So we haven't gone over break yet. So break is kind of similar to, let's see, similar to the spam equals spam plus 1. And why is that? It's because this acts as a stopping point. Because remember, for the while loop with the numeric I just covered, while spam is less than 5, this loop would go on and on until spam was greater or was equal or greater than 5. So this was making sure this was actually a pseudo break, because it was saying, okay, there is a stopping point actually to this while loop. Here, break is kind of doing the same thing with strings. So strings don't have that same value as numbers, as in being increased to 1 to be eventually stopped. So for strings, for variables that contain strings, we have to put just a strict breaking point. So just write break. So if name is Bob, then the computer user is the proper name. So we want this the program to stop asking for the username entirely. And we would just print, hello Bob, you're welcome. So let's let me show you what happens when I run this. It's asking for my name. So let's say that there was an intruder who wanted to break into this computer, and this was one of the security measures that they had to go through. So, and this was a very truthful intruder, so he wrote that his name was Tom, and it would ask for his name again because it didn't meet the name that we've specified with the program in the beginning, which is Bob. So let's predict something else again, like Taylor. Again, it's going to keep on asking until it writes Bob, and then once the name Bob is put in, it breaks from this while loop and can go on to the next line. So this is pretty cool. So in while loops, there's actually examples of breaks, and there's also something called continue. So continue works a bit differently than breaks. So break was basically saying, okay, keep on running this until whatever we're testing is named a certain value, and then we can stop this this while loop and go to the next line. What continue does is, let's see, basically tells it, here, let me just delete this and make this a continue here. If the name is not Bob, I want you to continue back to the for loop. So this is kind of telling it almost like a further loop through while loop, because the name was not Bob, so it was an intruder, so I want you to continue to go back to it. And to add on to this, we can even have additional parameters set up. So instead of having the program just ask for the user's name, we wanted to have user put in the password as well. So let's see, password, have it input what is the password, and I'm gonna have it give it a hint, fish, and then the password. So if name is, if password is salmon, because I really like salmon, I want this program to break. And then at the end, I wanted to say, hello Bob, access granted with password. Alright, so let's try running this. So basically, this is making sure that the name is not just Bob, but once it is Bob, that the user then enters the password, and the password, it fits whatever was specified for the program. And finally, when those two criteria meet, then it can print hello Bob, access is granted with password. Alright, let's try running this. So let's pretend that it's not Bob, it's someone else. So I'll say Amy, and it, again, because of the continue, it goes back to the previous loop. Keep on doing this until the name equals Bob. So let's do a couple more guesses. Let's say Ami, and then we're going to say Bob at the end. And then because it passed the Bob name, the naming criteria, it then asks for the password, and the hint is fish. So let's say that it guessed, I don't know, tuna instead of salmon, which is what we're predicting. So when we type in tuna, it is not true. So it goes back to this loop again. So now we have to put in the name again. So name Bob, and now let's say that Bob remembered all of a sudden that his password was salmon and not tuna. So let's type in salmon, and it says, hello Bob, access is granted with password. Perfect. Alright, so this is what a while loop is. It's a bit more complex than if-else statements. Just to reiterate, if-else is mostly done for one pass, but while loop you can have it do multiple times until there is some criteria that it meets, then it can stop, or else it's going to keep going and going. And finally, we're going to talk about the for loop. So for loops are a bit similar to while loops. There are some slight discrepancies though, or differences. So for loops look like this. So for I in range, oh, I guess I didn't go over range. So range is basically, you can pretend that there's like a 0 here. So it would go through the range, it would go through the numbers like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So Python actually doesn't read the last number as the last number. I know that's kind of a bit complicated to understand, but in R, when you type in range 0 to 10, it actually includes 10 as the exclusively, but inclusively, but then in Python, this only goes up to 9. So keep that in mind. And so when we do, so this basically, instead of doing range 0 to 10, we could have done 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, up until 9. So it's basically saying the same thing, but again, programmers love shortcuts, so we can just do range 10 and print I. So for I is representing all the numbers here. So like I said, blah blah up to 9. So I is taking on these values right here, and it is printing it out. So let me show you what happens if I just keep it as 10. Oh, missing parentheses. Okay. So make sure you listen to the syntax error and make it print exactly as you want. And you can see here, for every I in this range of numbers, print out that I. So it prints out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So this has a very specified number of times we want it to run. So a bit different than the while loops, because while loops I guess with while loops, if it's numbers, then you could have it do the same command. But if the while loop was being used for example, name guessing, it wouldn't necessarily work. Alright, so let me go back to that example. So for loops and while loops are often used interchangeably sometimes. So we could actually use while loops in order to run this kind of similar function. And to do that, we can do, actually you guys can try it out. Actually try to print out 0 to 9 using while loops. And I'll give you guys a couple seconds, or you can pause this actually. Alright, and let me go explaining how to do this. So remember that for loops you didn't have to initialize the values you were going to use, but for while loops you do. So let's say the variable we're going to use as count. So count is 0, so while count is less than 10, we wanted to print out count, because count is taking is 0, and we want it to be increased by 1, or else it's going to continue to run however many times. So we have to make sure that we add 1 to count every time. Also, real quick, a simpler way of writing count equals count plus 1 is just doing count plus equals 1. So this is basically the same thing as what was said earlier with count equals count plus 1. It's just that, again, programmers love to use a quicker syntax like this right here so that they can save time. So you can just think of these as interchangeable. So let me just run this line right here to see what we get, if what we get is similar to the output that we just printed above. And when we do that, voila, we do get 0 to 9. Alright, and that ends my session. So as a quick summary, we talked about for loops. Actually, initially we talked about if-else statements, which was pretty simple, and then we talked about while loops that contained breaks and continue, and finally we ended with for loops. Alright, and that sums it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this session. Thank you, and I will see you again for the next tutorial. Bye.